Did you start your career with the aspiration of one day doing work that is deeply meaningful to you? Many of us do, but as the years pass, we might struggle with truly fulfilling that desire. Yet, as my guest Uday Dandavate shares with us, we can start transforming what work means for us by shifting our perspective and what we look for. In Uday's case, he shifted his approach to work from making objects to deeply understanding people's experience of life, and then shifting from selling to co-creating value with others. In this episode, Uday and I talk about his life as a designer and travels to learn how culture influences people's choices, his first experiences with participatory design, co-founding his company SonicRim in San Francisco in the late 1990s, how he shifted his mindset from selling products to co-creating value with others, why he invites his clients to express the purpose of their designs in a poem, and his experience teaching at Carnegie Mellon University's Integrated Innovation Institute. Uday invites us all to look at things differently and explore the world through the eyes of others. In the spirit of extending that invitation to you, here is a short poem by Uday titled When You Look at Something, from his book, Finding Your Bebo, Design Thinking for Everyday People. The poem is performed by spoken word artist Amy Baez.
When you look at something, you can only see what is right in front of you. There is always more than what your eyes can perceive. You must go behind your eyes to see the other side. From where you sit, you can only see what you take in where your eyes can reach. To know more, you can ask others what they see from where they sit. When you are able to look from all sides and know what others see, you will learn more than what you can perceive from where you sit.
Uday, welcome to
Hi,
Making Business Art. Thank you so much for being with me today.
you're welcome.
I really appreciate it. Before we really dive into the conversation, let's just first have you tell us about where do you work and what do you get paid to do?
That's a good question. Well, I don't work. That's the first thing I wanted to say. I play, I wander, I build relationships, and in the process, I get people to just envision the future together. And it just happens that I make money doing that, but not everything that I do makes money for me. So a part of it which makes money for me is a company called SonicRim, which I co-founded with three other partners 24 years ago. Their names were Liz Sanders, Dr. Liz Sanders, Marty Gage, Kevin Schmidt, and I. And now 24 years later, I'm the only one left. And we were inspired by, at that time, when we were at Fitch, Liz's philosophy of participatory design. And that evolved into co-creation. So we are kind of a co-creation agency. But what we get paid for, it's a good question. Over time, it's been different things. When we started the company, we got paid for design research. Sometimes we got paid for ethnography. Sometimes we got paid for concept testing. A lot of it was closer to design. But as people worked with us and we traveled around the world and we brought our clients in contact with how real people in the real world, in the diversity of the world, how they think, how they imagine the future, what they do, how they live, what's meaningful to them, they realize that more than what they know, their consciousness expands of the world, of its complexities, of its diversity, and the way they think and act evolves. So therefore, I would say we get paid to expand the consciousness of organizations and their people.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, Uday, we're going to talk about SonicRim and some of the things that you're doing today. But first, I like to dive into people's life story and get a few notes of history and perspective and lessons learned. And something that I like to dive into first is just recognizing that you were born and raised in India and you did your
Mhm.
studies, your university studies there, and then you came to the US later to do more advanced studies, graduate studies. And first of all, can you just tell me, because you worked in India for a while, as far as I could tell,
Yes, I did.
w- tell me about just designing in India versus designing in the US. What's different? What's the same?
You said designing, right?
Doing design work.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be caught up in the past because what I was doing in India is different from what designers do in India now.
Yeah. Well, I
But
mean,
I,
historically, in your own life experience, what was it
okay,
like for you designing in India
okay,
versus then designing in the US
got
later?
it. So when I went to design school, it was not a typical Indian design school. It was a design school which was initiated with collaboration with Charles and Ray Eames. They were invited by the Prime Minister of India to do a tour of India and develop a framework for what kind of a contemporary design school would they envision to represent the ethos of India. So based on their recommendations and based on recommendations from many other experts in design, the National Institute of Design, NID, where I studied, created a very open program of learning, which was cross-disciplinary, combined design of artifacts with learning about the environment and people and cultures, all rooted in the local ethos. And also, it was important that we developed multi-sensory appreciation for all the stimulus that exists in the world. So we learned music and cinema and all of those things, regardless of what discipline we chose. So that's where I began. It was a 5.5 year program. I took 6 years and I took the least number of years. Some people took up to 11 years. There was no pressure on you on when to finish. You took, you could decide on your own pace of learning as long as you were paying fees and get out when you were ready to go and get out. There were no exams. You only built your portfolio and you developed your awareness. When I got out, my first job was in a television manufacturing company in a place called Lucknow, where I designed transistor radio and a television. India's first plastic molded TV that was indigenously designed was designed by me. And then I got bored there, so I moved to Mumbai, where I joined a domestic appliance manufacturing company, where I designed electric iron and an electric oven, a gas oven, sorry. Worked there for 4 years. Then I started my own practice. It was called Design Inputs and ran it for 11 years. I designed variety of products for all kinds of companies, products, packages, and retail interiors. And then every year I would travel around the world, attend design conferences, visit design offices, attend trade shows. And I realized that in order to become really aware of global trends in design, I had to go back to school outside of India. So I applied all over the place. I got into 3 schools in the US, Pratt Institute, North Carolina State University, and Ohio State. I chose Ohio State. And that's where I came in contact with, I went there to study this product semantics with Reinhard Buter. And in the process, I met Dr. Liz Sanders, and who had majored in anthropology and psychology. I met other people, Klaus Kripenda from the Annenberg School of Communications at Wharton, at UPenn, and they expanded my knowledge. I got an internship at Fitch, a design firm out of Columbus. I started going into people's homes, and I found it's fascinating to understand people, culture, and change. So I kind of decided not to be a designer, but focused more on being design researcher, practice participatory design. At that time, I learned about C.K. Prahlad, who talked about co-creation. And at one point, after working for 5 years at Fitch, we decided to start SonicRim 24 years ago. And since then, that's what we do, co-creation.
Wow, amazing. How can you describe, was there any difference when you came to study in the US and started to kind of work or do internships like at Fitch? How was that experience different from your work experience in India, or maybe it wasn't? Like, how would you
Oh,
contrast it?
huge difference. In fact, I changed fundamentally. In India, at that time, all my design inspiration came from catalogs from around the world, from my visits around the world, a lot of it from the minimalistic design traditions. And a lot of my work was designing form that created psychological impact on people, that people would like it, associate meaning with it, and so on. So, and like any other designer around the world, my aspiration was to be a great designer, to have my products in design museums, in design catalogs, magazines, in conferences. And I wanted to believe that with this exclusive design capability I have, I could change the world. I didn't realize then that this whole value system was driven by ego and in some way arrogance. As I embraced knowledge from psychology, anthropology, sociology, communications fields, started going into people's homes, I realized even in the cultures and countries which I saw as like leading countries of design, what I saw in people's homes was not what was designed by industrial designers always. People design their own homes, their own environments with the meaning making tools that they have in their mind, with the mental models of the world they want to live with in their mind. And that's where I began to tame my ego and become more curious about, so what makes life what it is to people and how do they construct it? So it was a fundamental change for me to like not design for people, but to design with people, and eventually to not even design at all, but to just inspire people to design for themselves.
Yeah. Wow, that's super interesting. On the heels of that question, I also wanted to take a pass at explore this other thing for a moment, and that is like human needs. I think we could argue that human needs seem to be pretty universal, but people in different places and times go about fulfilling those needs in somewhat different ways. So in your, again, from your background in India, then you came to the US, and then you've also done research for global brands and global projects. What are your observations? Like, how are people similar, and then how are they different?
Well, we are different because we live in different geographies. We grow up in different cultures. Every individual is different genetically as well as the life experience they accumulate. So we are, each one of us, not because of our culture or anything else, are unique. And to that extent, each one of us is striving to build our own life experience. And we have the capacity and potential to evolve into something different, just as a single leaf of a tree. No single leaf is the same as another. But then we have the essence of humanity in us. Nature made us as a specific species. It gave us responsibilities. It gave us faculties that are similar. So what we do with it, with these external influences, makes us different. So do we strive to be different, or do we strive to be similar? What do we tap into depends, changes from time to time. What draws us joy, what draws us meanings, sometimes is our humanity, sometimes it's our culture, sometimes it's our identity. So we make those mental shifts and we live different identities.
So you brought up Fitch, your time at Fitch, and actually this is coming out of your time at Ohio State. And at that time, if I recall correctly, these methods of generative research, which are a little more common today, they were like kind of like pretty new back then. Could you say more about that? And I think it was Liz who was kind of spearheading that. Say more about like why was that new? Like in what ways was that approach new, and what was that approach about?
So first, Liz at Fitch was probably an experiment that Fitch did in bringing a social scientist to influence designerly way of thinking and practicing design. Later in the years, when IDEO was formed, Jane Fulton Suri was another that IDEO brought in as a social scientist. And around that time at Fitch, there was John Reinfrank and Shelley Evanston, who were also part of the team that was experimenting with the knowledge, insights, culture of the world that can shape and bring richness and profound qualities to designers' way of designing form and function and meaning. So it was kind of a renaissance period and a period of change for the world of design. And I just stumbled into Liz. I joined Fitch just after John Reinfrank had left, but Liz was kind of spearheading that, what that time it was called user research group, as opposed to market research group. And because she came from Norwegian background, the Scandinavian history of participatory design was bearing on her intellectual framework. And I was her student, I was her intern, and then a reportee. And so anybody who was young and craving to do something different was gravitating towards working with her. And anyone who was trying to cross the fields and cross-pollinate ideas, as opposed to doing things the way they learned in the school, was gravitating towards her. So it kind of became an internal organism that was creating new ways of thinking about design.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Sounds like a really good time to be there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us more about participatory design, since you've touched on that a few times. Like, what exactly is that, and like, what does it look like?
Well, the philosophy of participatory design actually didn't start in design. In Sweden, it began as a political philosophy. The cooperative movement came from the philosophy of participatory design. The belief is that there is a collective intelligence. There is a capacity to align each other's energies and imagination in building a constructive way of life, constructive way of politics, in a democratic and socially responsible way of conducting life, where you don't have to have a top-down agency, government ruling your minds and your behaviors and actions. So within the framework of certain basic universal values and principles and arrangements, you can actually build institutions where people behave responsibly, care for each other, and live a fulfilling life. So that's like a bigger philosophy of participatory design from which we borrow. And it kind of became a counterculture to the established culture of design world, which was so ego-driven, top-down driven. We are the smarter people. We are the meritorious people who are going to change the world. Instead of that, bringing this idea that design doesn't begin or end with designers. It lives in the life of everyday people who have to have the only responsibility to shape their life. Once you recognize that, you also recognize that people have intuition and knowledge of their surroundings, their culture, their community, their home, their needs. Mm-hmm. And we have limited time, attention, and patience to understand all of that. So if you include them, they bring that entire intuition to bear on the design process, that wisdom to bear on that process. And therefore, having people to participate in the process of design, whether it's a design of a product, a service, a brand, an institution, a culture, a mindset, or just the process of change, it takes into account the tacit knowledge, the local knowledge of people, and therefore participatory design has greater chance of having a more sustainable life.
I mean, even though that is somewhat more common today, at least I still encounter leaders or teams who think they know their customers, they don't need to talk to anybody else, they have the answers. And I can imagine that when you were at Ohio State and starting at Fitch, I can imagine that you also encountered a bit of that. How did your team go about persuading leaders to give this a try at the time, loosen up and be more open to invite people in?
I was not party to some of the challenges Liz must have faced at a more senior level.
Right.
But I can talk about some of the things I have seen, observed, or experienced. A very typical example would be we go out and study a certain kind of audience. And that might be teenagers, that might be older people, that might be people from a different culture, Latinos, for example. And then we come back to a design team, which is primarily drawn from traditional Caucasian designer. And we say, this is what people need. This is how people live. This is how people think. I've been in meetings where people have said, I don't believe it. And we would say, why? Because they would say, I wouldn't do it. So a lot of, in the early stages, the designer's projection of what people need was a projection of what they need.
Right.
I would even say Steve Jobs, what he created was a projection of his evolved design sensitivities rather than catering to or having respect to the diversity of mindsets and cultures that exist in the world.
Right.
So we designers tend to move the world more towards homogeneity than towards preserving the diversity of the world.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets back to the question I was asking earlier about people having kind of similar fundamental needs, but going about fulfilling those needs in different ways. Was there a time either at Ohio State or like when you first were starting at Fitch that this participatory process or the process of visiting people do you remember a time, was there a time where you had some aha or some insight about what that process meant for you or any learning or I guess insight?
Lots of learnings. I'll give you a few examples. Of course, I came from India, where the colors, textures, patterns are driven by its traditions and crafts and the cultural sensitivities. As I traveled around the world, Mexico, for example, Brazil, for example, Scandinavia, Italy, Japan, you see different kinds of textures of life, I would call it, colors of life. And you begin to recognize that, and suddenly you feel, aha, there is such a flavor that sits on top of some of the basic foundational functional principles we are looking for. It's not just about comfort and ergonomics. It's more about adding the layer of the cultural nuance on top of your design that makes a difference. So that was one thing that I knew it, but I began to feel it as I went into people's homes.
Right.
A very interesting interview I watched was of Thomas Friedman, who said there's one food item that's available around the world, pizza, that has the same base, but the topping is different, which is culturally defined. And everybody around the world thinks they're eating the same thing, pizza. They're eating a different flavor, relishing the different flavor. They think it's their pizza brought to them by a brand. And he called it global design. So there's a global base and local top. And that makes it a globe. So that was another aha moment for me. The third aha moment for me was we were doing research for PetSmart, a store for pets. And we were doing research to follow people's behaviors in the store. And after 2 days of observation, I realized that a bunch of people, I would put a number, say 20% of people who visited PetSmart had brought their dogs with them. And you know how close people are to their dogs, how much they care for their feelings and their experience. And I saw dogs were sniffing, looking at things, engaged with something, sometimes pulling them in a different direction. So I decided I was going to do an ethnography of dogs in PetSmart. So not only did I follow the shoppers, but I also followed the dogs in the store. And I don't remember what conclusions I came up with, but I created an edited video where sometimes the focus was on the shoppers and sometimes was on their dogs and the things where they stopped. And one of my things was the store needs to communicate to the owners of the dogs that not only do they care for their experience, but also for the experience of their dogs. So these are the things I would never have thought of. I've also found children tell profound truths. I've had experiences around the world where 4-year-old, 6-year-old children would say things that sound so philosophical. They have observations about their parents that parents never knew they had observed or were thinking about. They've interpreted parents' behaviors in ways that parents themselves had not interpreted. And in one case, once a 5-year-old kid presented a collage he had made of his life. And I asked him, what does the word stress mean? And he said, stress of my life. And I could never imagine a 5-year-old kid making a collage where he put the word stress in the middle of his collage. And we had a long conversation about what was the stress he experienced. So all of these things give me the humility to understand that to design for somebody, you need to understand them, understand their life, understand their experience of life and their perspectives, and create a space where we can all coexist.
Those are great stories. So then you mentioned that Liz and some other partners, some other people and yourself got together and started SonicRim. And so this would have been right around the tech boom of the late 90s, right?
Yes, in fact, technically we started it in 98, but operationally, like formally, we started it in 99, April 1st, that April Fool's Day. We actually entered our space. Before that, we were working from Marty's house, in Liz's house or a farmhouse, wherever in the evenings after doing our work. It takes a lot of time to get a company started. So what was your question? Sorry.
No, so I'm acknowledging that then you started this company. So it was right around the tech boom.
Yes, tech boom.
So what sort of work were you doing first when you first started this company, 98, 99, 2000? Like, what were you working on?
This was interesting. We didn't do a lot of work for the .com era, but we were affected after the .com crash. But I will answer your first question. Our first two projects were, one was with Microsoft and one was with Steelcase. With Steelcase, it was about understanding effects of postures on work experience. And with Microsoft, it was about, later on we called it fields of home experience. That was the time when our clients, Steve Kaneko and Edie Adams, they came to us saying, today computers are commonplace in work, but we want to see what computers would mean or computing mean at home. Take a long-term view and share it with industry as the vision of computing at home. So we did a lot of work around home, what people do at home, more like an anthropological approach to home, and looking at the intersection between future of technology and the future of living and experiencing home. And we came up with these 5 fields of home experience. They were not defined by the walls of the home, but by the behaviors at home, the feelings of the home. And so we call them fields of home experience. At that time, we were also reading stuff by Rupert Sheldrake on morphological fields. I don't know if you've heard about that, or morphic resonance. So he talks about there exists fields of wisdom that get carried across generations in all species, birds, humans, anybody. So they last longer, and that wisdom people tap into in certain behaviors. So drawing from that idea, we actually came up with these morphic fields of home experience. And so both our projects were not really tech projects. They were about human experience, and they were because both of those people had worked with us at Fitch. In fact, the VP of design at that time was an ex-Fitcher, and Stephen Edie had worked a lot with us. So we continued to bring the humanity and human angle to bear on the design process, no matter whether we're working on technology or services or brands or foods or anything. But I must say that at any given time, whatever was the latest technology, latest trend, or latest change, the clients came to us to see what is the future alongside that change. So we would have been working on the web at that time. We worked with WebMD about what does the web portal for WebMD look like for different stakeholders of WebMD. We worked on many years for phone manufacturers, from simple flip phones all the way till smartphones of today, to talk about what that means. We worked with connected home. We worked with tablets. We worked with now autonomy and virtual reality and driverless cars and electric cars, big data, anything that you say that seems to be like the thing that's going to change the world. We were looking at what is the human angle of that. And now I would call it humanitarian angle of that.
But at the end of the day, isn't we all of us, right? The society, we get so wrapped up on the technologies that are out there, the new technologies. But at the end of the day, the technology is an enabler to allow people to do or accomplish something at some level. And again, I go back. I mean, what's your perspective on human needs? The fundamental human needs don't really change, but the environment, the ways that we can meet our needs, that changes because now we can do this, right? You're in San Francisco, I'm in Miami. We turned on this computer and here we are having a lovely conversation. I don't know. What are your reflections around that? Like this, at the end of the day, the technology, it's all about the human angle, isn't it? Or no?
Yeah, it's whether it was the first time a human being created fire, or the now that people are trying to put autonomous cars on the road, we are always trying to fulfill some desire in us to transcend our present and take us to the next level of a magical experience, a convenience, or build a relationship, or transcend into a new reality. I think we all seek meaning and magic in life.
I agree with that.
Huh?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah.
And of course, we need to learn our living from what we do purposefully, in a way that we seek feedback that we are playing a productive role in the society, that it brings us dignity, that I'm doing something that's important to the society, that somebody's paying for it, somebody's benefiting from it. And when we build such a society where our energy, our imagination, and our skills come together to create a visible change in the environment that brings delight or magic or wonder to people, or care or wellness or happiness, whatever that might be, you feel a sense of fulfillment. So at any given time, The technology is only a toy with which we tinker to create that experience.
That's so true. Yeah. We could take things for granted after a while. This is going to sound probably a little funny or weird to people, but something I give gratitude for in the mornings when I turn on the shower and there's this awesome water pressure. I'm just so grateful for that and the people who worked on that over the years. Because where I grew up, sometimes the water pressure was really weak and you just had this little trickle of water coming out of like a shower head, or just like turning a faucet and we get like clean water out of that, or just like flipping a switch and there's lights, versus life 200-300 years ago. I mean, this is pretty wild, just the changes that have happened in 2-3 centuries. But then there's some things that we take for granted day to day.
Yeah, but also we have to be mindful that the changes are not equitable. There are haves and have-nots. And I think being mindful of that and creating a more equitable world needs to be one of the criteria as designers bring humanity to design.
Yeah, it's well said. Uday, fast forwarding to the present, I wanted to ask you, like, what are common problems clients are now bringing to you in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Health is one.
Mhm.
Artificial intelligence is another one.
Mm.
I'm beginning to see interest in post-pandemic future because it has brought about many changes fundamentally in how people think. People are coming to us with the recognition that people they design for, they don't know them, whether they are socio-economically disadvantaged people in their own culture or people from a different culture. That's why not just now, but for the last 24 years, one of SonicRim's biggest strength has been global research, understanding cultures, people, and including them effectively using our tools and methods to express fearlessly, constructively, positively a future that would make life better for them. And I think so the clients are recognizing that they need to create a sense of well-being, bring humanity in us to bear on technology, and now more so address some of the difficult questions such as ethics, equity, and potential dangerous impact of our creation on the world. And even some of the clients are even bringing us in to bring synergy within different groups within the company to be aligned and respectful of the changes that are happening in the world.
I mean, it's encouraging to hear that business leaders are even thinking about that, because sometimes it might not necessarily seem that way out in the world just as a consumer of or customer of different brands. But that's very encouraging.
That's very encouraging. But I can also say that from my experience, a lot of global big companies will spend millions of dollars to confirm what they know and only spend a little bit of money to know what they don't know.
Right.
So I think as much as there is a small opening and awareness to expand their consciousness, there's a lot more energy and resources being spent to live within the box than to think outside the box.
Right. Which actually you touched on something I meant to ask earlier, and I wanted to
And of
spend
course, they don't come to us for that. They don't come to us to know how to live comfortably in the box.
Okay. Well, yeah, that you would be the wrong person for that. But I did want to spend a little bit of time, if you could unpack your own perspective on the proverbial tension between qualitative data and quantitative data, And part of the reason why I bring that up is we do come across clients or people who are very enamored of quantitative data. They have this position that generally provides all the answers. And if you have sufficient amounts of quantitative data, that's going to give you all the answers that you need. Obviously, I have an anthropology background, so I'm not one to be in agreement with that perspective. But what's your take on the role, benefits, and limits of quantitative data, and then where qualitative data is very useful in and then specifically in uncovering what we don't know that we might not know?
So I'll take a shot at saying something, but my answer will not be comprehensive.
Okay.
But let me say a few things. A lot of my work is with corporations, global corporations or big companies. So they tend to operate with evidence because a lot of their decisions have high risks, and therefore in selecting their projects, in making decisions, quantitative data helps mitigate some of the risk at the best. At the worst, it helps cover their base. When failures occur, you can blame the data. So for an organization to build comfort around decisions, quantitative data helps. In making some decisions that the data can reveal, data is rich. And especially in new data science, it can reveal a lot of interesting behaviors as we move more into machine learning and artificial intelligence. You need massive data to understand patterns in people's behaviors and preferences. So I would say there is value to that. Data science is different from quantitative research, but I'm just talking about massive data. On the other hand, when you're understanding people, understanding change, interpreting emergent change that only shows up on the fringes of consciousness, or fringes of the visible world, you want to be prepared for that emergent change. For that, the kind of tools you need are more conversational, they're more qualitative, they're more about, less about breadth and more about depth of conversation. They're more about balance of breadth and depth. They're more about digging out things that are tacit, that can't be seen, that can't be talked about, but they're present, they're latent in the environment, in people's psychology, in people's evolving mindsets, in evolving cultures, in evolving technologies. And that's where qualitative work prepares you for an emergent future, prepares you for some of the human elements, such as emotions, such as culture, such as just possibilities, mindsets, metaphors. Some of these aspects that provide us meaning and touch points to human behaviors can be better grasped with qualitative research. Also, they're fun. I would be bored sitting on a computer and crunching data. Some people love it. But right. You, who's an anthropologist, I'm a designer, studied anthropology, sociology, communication. For me, I like to live in a world of wonder and discovery and curiosity. That's where I draw my meaning of life from. So for me, qualitative is fun and gives me a stake in the future and gives me the opportunity to tell stories to my grandchild, saying, look, this future, what you are seeing now was the future I saw much before it arrived. So it makes life thrilling.
Yeah, quantitative data is wonderful. I just take issue when somebody just kind of makes an absolute statement or solution out of one versus the other, where I think exploring both is really where we want to be.
I will tell you a very interesting story without giving his name. We did a research project on the needs for communication between parents, teachers, and students and administrators in K through 12 education. It was a qualitative research project sponsored by Microsoft. At the end of the project, we made a big presentation with a lot of displays of things that we learned, visual, graphical, textual. And there were 30 people in audience. We had a lot of interactions. At the end of the session, while walking out, one of the very senior people, I don't know what level he was, he came to me and he said, you know what? This was fascinating. I learned a lot. I changed some of my beliefs. And I also realized something on a side note. I've primarily used quantitative research, but I realize most of the time, my vendors know what I want to know, and they'll come back telling me what I want to know and confirm what I want to know. Whereas today, I learned a lot of things I didn't know. And it gives me a different kind of feeling and curiosity and confidence to try things out differently. So this was a different experience. Thank you for bringing me that experience. So that was a very interesting thing coming from somebody who had only commissioned quantitative research.
Wow. I think that's a great story. I mean, that's very transformational. I think it's definitely just crucial and important to explore with different tools in different ways, and the qualitative approach can definitely be.
If I may, I'll give you one more
powerful
example.
Yeah.
We were doing a global study and for Motorola, and they would send a lot of their executives with us in the field to understand what we are discovering. So one of the finance guys, a very senior finance guy who was responsible for funding new ventures, decided to come with us to Milan and Austin. And the moment we met for briefing, he had a question of, these are the questions he wants answered by the participants. And there were things like, how much would he pay for this? What is the exact value of the benefit they get? And all of those things. If they had to make a trade-off between this and this, what would it be? And I said, thank you. I will keep this behind my mind. If I find the opportunity, I'll ask them at the right time. But don't blame me if you don't get answers to all of your questions. We finished Milan, we finished Austin. I didn't ask any of his questions. On our drive back to the hotel, I asked him, how do you feel? I didn't ask any of your questions. He said, I learned a lot from what I saw and what I heard. And I don't really care that you didn't answer my question because I was asking you wrong questions and you were asking them right questions. So I came here to learn. I didn't come here to get my questions answered. So I feel you're on the right track. That's all he said.
It is great that when you can take people along with you, because reading reports back in an office, it gives you some information, but we have this wonderful nervous system, right? So being in a place, smelling things and seeing things and just feeling a space, feeling being with others, you just can't replace that. It's just so great when you can get people to come along.
Things happen serendipitously. Things happen suddenly that are the most important. Like even that big essay, the Balinese cockfight, would not have happened unless cops had come and disturbed that cockfight in Bali. Yep. And now just that disturbance where Clifford Gibbs had to run for life and hide in a stranger's home created a whole essay that has become a legend in anthropology.
Yeah. Could you also touch on co-creation? Can you tell us more about that? Like, what does that look like?
So I would give my discovery of co-creation to a book written by C.K. Prahlad and Ramaswamy. He was a professor at, I think, University of Chicago. Don't hold me 100% to that. But he's the guy who came up with three profound concepts: core competency, wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, and co-creation. So co-creation, when I read it, I took away two big points on it. Number one, we have to create value, not sell products. So it's all about creating value for all. In a value chain, there are many stakeholders and they all have to gain something from it in order to participate in feeding that supply chain. So ultimately, you have to think about how do we engage everyone to create a win-win situation for all through creation of value. And that interpretation of value for each stakeholder is different. So that's a big point. So my mind shifted from designing products that affect behaviors and emotions to creating value that may have many dimensionalities and many interpretations to different people. So that was the first big shift for me in co-creation. And then, of course, the idea that more than what you sell and buy, there's wisdom that exists within the value chain, within the supply chain. And then when you tap into that, you get richer set of insights that actually speed up the process to the market, from mind to market, reduces a lot of risks, and just creates a more sustainable solution. That was another thing that I learned from that. So co-creation in my way, and this is something I have to keep explaining to my clients, because a lot of times people misinterpret between participatory design and co-creation. Sometimes they will think bringing users together in a group session and getting them to design something or design an idea is co-creation. No, I say co-creation is the entire process, the way your entire value chain thinks, how the way your organization thinks, how it generates ideas, how it makes decisions. So it has these three elements. One of my research directors who recently left our company, Arvind, you know him, he came up with a model which says it's co-creation is co-define, co-design, and co-decide. So the entire process, and that actually affects, and that's why our most valuable clients are the ones who I've worked with for more than 10 years. And they come back to us because cumulatively what they learn is they learn to think, co-define, co-design, and co-decide collaboratively in a way that is accommodative, constructive, and that culture of thinking together and designing together is far more powerful. That's where the difference between co-creation and participatory design is.
And if somebody showed up at a moment where you're gathering people to co-create, what might they see? Like who's involved and what might be going on?
I think in an ideal world, co-creation is invisible. What you're seeing is a specific activity in co-creation. What you feel is the spirit of co-creation. And the challenge you face in making shifts in how you think and in your belief is the symptom of co-creation. If you feel your beliefs being challenged, you are going through the co-creation process. When you end up in a process where you feel, oh my God, we have all not been here together ever before, or this feels different together, that's a symptom of co-creation. So co-creation is more about you have to feel it than see it.
That's a great answer. Uday, I wanted to touch on your teaching because you also teach. Well, you've been teaching on and off for many years, but you're currently teaching. Remind me, you're teaching where right now?
The Integrated Innovation Institute of the Carnegie Mellon University.
Yes, that's right. So something I wanted to first of all just ask you again some historical perspective from your own life. In what ways is relating to the world of work today both similar and maybe different from when you started your career when you were in your mid-20s? How would you contrast that from what you're seeing young people in their mid-20s right now experiencing and relating to work in your clients and with your students?
What is the context to education in that?
Well, really a context there is that you're just in contact with young people. So I'm just
Okay. Okay.
first looking for some historical perspective, and then I'll get into educational context.
I would say there is no difference. I would say people who come to college, at least the colleges where I've taught and I've studied, I'm not talking about all the colleges.
Right.
So I've primarily been colleges that are more geared towards design and innovation. They come to learn ways of having an impact on the world through their own creativity and genius. They come there to gain knowledge, to apply and systematic methods so that they can go out and continue to process information in the world to make the world a better place. And I think at that level, there is no difference. We have a sense of purpose, we have a sense of enthusiasm, curiosity, all of them. I feel the same enthusiasm in the students I taught, graduate students I taught until last week, and who I was 45 years ago, 48 years ago. Our tools are different. The jobs we might find are different. Our success criteria are different, but the differences amongst us are also the same. There are some people are more money minded, some people are more philosophically minded, some people are more socially minded, and those differences still exist. So, and it's just that students are the purest form of possibilities. That's why I like to invest in them. Working people are the messed up people who are like destroying the world, because we listen to Wall Street, we listen to corporations, we listen to the capitalist system, we become slaves of those systems, and we lose our conscience and consciousness. But then people like us who are trained in design schools and in anthropology school and social sciences to do good, we remain idealist at heart, even when we make compromises in our workplace. We at least become the voice of reason, voice of challenge, and the catalyst of a dialogue. And as I see the world moving more and more towards destroying itself, polluting itself, bringing more violence into the world, bringing more destruction in the world, at least people are like us who are wedded to the humanitarian and ecological values, we are like just a little ray of hope.
So, and I think you're already touching on this, but what are you teaching this young people, like this latest cohort of young people that you're coming in contact with?
I was hoping you would ask me that question. So all my 25 students came from software engineering background or computer science background. And with anywhere between, only one person came with no experience, 3 to 20-year long experience in computer science industry, software industry. They've come here to become product managers so that they could take on more challenging projects, become innovators, make more money, and just have more say in this whole process of technological transformation of the world. So they are the ones who have the power to make the world worse if their ambitions and their tools and their techniques are not applied mindfully. What I taught them was to be mindful. What I taught them is, if you want to be just another programmer, just be a programmer. But if you want to be a product manager, take responsibility for making the world a more humane world. Ask questions about what, and then find out how your technology, your product benefits communities, families, societies. So I'm giving you a new language and concepts, mindsets, methods, and tools with which to think about the consequences of your actions that you're trained in. You're not going to go become a designer overnight, but I want to create a restlessness in you that will make you question your own actions and the consequences of those actions. That's what I taught them.
Nice. What sort of questions were they bringing to you? I'm curious. Like, what were some common questions that would bubble up during the semester?
I think it was nice that after the first class and through a series of guest lecturers, people really put behind their engineering mindset. And a lot of their questions about like, how do I do this? More than why do I do this? How can I be a better at learning human psychology? How can I be better at understanding how social interactions happen? How can I use visual thinking tools? I can't draw. Is it really important for me to draw? Wow, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to try it. These are the kind of comments I was getting.
Wow, that's wonderful. Uday, the name of this project is Making Business Art. What comes up for you when you hear that phrase?
Making business art. That's the most current obsession I have. Poetry. That comes to my mind.
Say
For the
more.
last 2 years, I've written 2 books, and my third one is in the making. On every project, I translate my findings into a poem, as if the collective conscience of the users was speaking out to the company. And I always ask 2 questions to my clients and to the engineers and designers. Does your design serve a purpose? And number 2, can the purpose be expressed in a poem? If you can answer these 2 questions, then you are on to creating something that's poetic. So that, in my view, is the connection between art and business.
Yeah. Well, Uday, jumping back in the time machine here, I know that a long time ago, you were a mime.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what did you learn about just people and humans from the art of miming?
So Marcel Marceau, French mime, with whom I took one workshop, once said mime is an art of touching from a distance. So I also say my concept of design is an art of touching from a distance. So, and I'll explain the whole thing to you. Sensitivities that I learned to form, function, textures, colors through design school, I learned it through making, building, touching, feeling, seeing. I began to pay attention to all of that. But in mime, I did the same thing. I began to pay attention to the form, the emotions, the environment, the behavior of the environment. And the way I translated my observations in design versus in mime were different. In mime, I had to recreate those attributes of the environment through my gestures and space. If I held something like this and showed a little weight to it, it gave you the idea of the form and the weight. If I touched it gently, it told you it's smooth. If I did that, it told you the sound it makes. You can picture all of that because I observed it, I assimilated, I had an image of the whole sensory experience that I was trying to create. So mime made me observant. Mime made me bring it all together in a multi-sensory form and to express it in a way where somebody sitting in audience could actually picture it and feel it. When I did a tug of war, where I have to like hold a rope and then pull it, I have to show the tension through my body, through my hands, so that people feel that tension. When I fall off, let the rope fall off, and I fall down, people can feel the thud. So all of that came from mime.
Yeah. So as you were learning to mime, curiosity, what does bad miming look or feel like? If it's just falling flat, it's not effective. Like why is that so? What's happening?
Well, mime requires a lot of discipline of the body and mind and perfection of form, just like any classical form, be it ballet or traditional Indian dance or whatever.
Mm.
And if you, or even graphic design, like there's good graphic design and there's sloppy graphic design. Yeah. So if you can be perfect, disciplined, and communicative, that's good. You just interpret mime as clowning, then you just become sloppy.
Mm.
You're not encompassing all the aspects of mime into one.
Yeah, I'm exploring like when art, be it music or acting or anything else, when it's bad, why is it bad? And when it's good, what's connecting? Like what's working, what's moving people emotionally?
I think a good design is universal design. Any human can appreciate it.
What I'm working to do with this project too is find ways to inspire people to make their work more beautiful and enchanting, right? To move people emotionally and then move them into action. I don't know, you have a reaction to that? Like any thoughts come up for you?
Yes. Don't think of design as the output, but a design as a mindset. I think I have learned a curious, open minded, fearless, and non judgmental mind lives in a world of wonder. And enchantment is like your everyday thing then.
Well said. Well said, Uday. Uday, so we're coming up on winding down our time together when I have a lightning round of questions
Okay.
for you. Feel free to pass, but I do invite you to play.
Okay.
All right. And so the first question gets a little personal, but do play with me here. Can you describe your closet and what state is it in?
My closet, crumpled clothes not ironed during the pandemic.
Very well. Next question is, what's the last piece of media that you loved? That could be a book or a movie, podcast, articles, or anything else.
That I love. Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud.
What is something that inspires you?
A stranger who opens up to me with love and curiosity.
Oh, it's beautiful. What song or band must you play during a road trip?
It depends on who's with me in the road trip. Because like I live in a multicultural family. My wife and I are of a different culture. My son-in-law is of a different nationality. His parents are from two different cultures. So depending upon who is in the ride,
Let's say a road trip that you want to be on.
a road trip I want to be on. If I'm alone, I would like to play spa music. So
Music, okay.
that's my new thing, something that calms me down, plays in the background so my imagination can grow rather than I'm paying attention to the words.
Okay, excellent. Last question. What do you want to see more of in the world?
Love.
Oh, beautiful sentiment. So, Uday, we're at the end of our time together. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to just open up the floor if you want to say a little bit more about SonicRim and who and why should they come to you if they need help, and where can they find you?
Well, just look for me, Uday at SonicRim.com, or go to SonicRim.com on our website. But who and why should come to us? If you want to really grasp the diversity and plurality and complexity of the world in a way that you can remain positive, constructive, curious, and bring different forces within your organization to actually appreciate it and use it as a resource for creativity and innovation, come to us, because we will take you on a journey to understand the reality and the imagination of the world. And we will help you craft a narrative that can inspire your audience.
Yeah. And you're based in San Francisco, but you work across the US and around the world, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Uday, thank you so much for making time to be on Make It Business Art today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, this has been a treat. Thanks.